Welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hey, Susan.
Hello, Guthrie.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. The sun is shining, so you know me. If the sun is
Yes, the
shining,
sun,
my mood is definitely up.
which is why we are
And
inside, not outside. Oops. So today we're doing a psychology one. We haven't done enough of those recently.
never enough psychology.
I don't think so. Yeah. So this is an interesting one. We're going to do a two-parter. The first is just going to be about sort of humans in general.
You don't mean two-parter like 2 episodes.
No,
You mean we're splitting this episode
splitting
into
this
2
splitting
parts.
this in half because it's really 2 different
Okay.
questions with
Okay.
2 different answers. So the first is going to be about like humans in general, children, babies, like just like humans.
Okay.
And
On a particular psychology topic.
Yeah. And the second is going to be sort of, okay, how about users, right? So
That
do
same
users
topic, thinking about design.
so users being sort of adults, but not just like adults like learning how to like, brush their teeth, but this is like a user who's trying to do something.
Okay. So what
and
is the psychology topic that you want to discuss in these 2 ways?
It's a crossroads that we may not have. There may not be one answer, but it's a good one. It's a tricky one, and it's about the intersection of resiliency versus ease, or I guess it would be makes more sense to do it ease versus resiliency. So I'll give you a quintessential ease versus resiliency battle.
Go ahead.
There are in the baby/child world, there are a lot of these pitched battles, and they mostly are the same over and over and over about different things. And the question is, I'll just give you the example to show you the point. Babies and children sleeping. There's one camp and they both sound reasonable. There's one camp that goes, well, and I should just say before, you don't need to answer this particular question. I'm just setting up the.
Got it. I got it.
One camp goes, you need to help your baby fall asleep or your child fall asleep. And so there are little, about the little booties that they can wear that track, that monitor their.
Oh my God. No.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that'll send it straight to your app, how deep they sleep. And so you have all this data and you can optimize to make sure the kid gets the best sleep possible, is sleeping longer, is sleeping whatever. There are, if you really want to, you can do either of these and then you compare them together. You can also get white noise monitors. You can get things that lull your child to sleep. And then if you want, they actually make stuff where they pair the data from the smart tracking booty with the white noise stuff. So when it recognizes that the kid is not sleeping as deeply through the tracker, that it'll kind of pump a little white noise to kind of get the kid back to sleep. Okay. So that is the one school of thought, which is you should help your child. The second school of thought is that kids especially, and I'm sure you'll think that kids and adults are different, but adults to some extent too. They should be resilient. So don't give your kid a white noise monitor, white noise maker. What is it? Machine, whatever. Machine. It's pretty generic. Don't give your kid a white noise speaker, because then the kid will have to have a white noise machine in order to fall asleep. And that noises will be more distracting and the kid won't be able to sleep as well later on. Or move your kid around. Have your kid sleep in, this room and that room and in this bed and in this other bed and like kind of this, like in a lap, so that the kid, is able to fall asleep anywhere, but maybe doesn't sleep as well in any one particular spot. So this is sort of the intersection, and there's a million of these. Obviously, child related is a lot of them, but you can there are other other ones when you're talking about a teenager in school, right? There's a lot of emphasis these days on kids specializing. So, hey, have your kids start at an early age. If they want to do the thing, they need a strategic advantage, right? So have them from an early age focus on this one thing and get really good at it. And, if it's basketball, right, you're playing young and you're doing AAU and there's all this, stuff. If it's, debate, you're in debate club, you're, go, 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 right? But like focus on one, maybe two or three things, but like really focus on one versus the kid should be resilient. So have the kid do 17 different things and try to have the kid do all sorts of, a wide variety of things so that later in life they have more experience or sort of resilient versus, specializing in one particular aspect. So that's both a psychology, and then when you get to sports, there's like the physical aspect of it. So for example, injury rates in almost all major sports in the United States are up than they used to be in the 80s, for example. And this is confusing. People don't, human bodies have not changed, right? It's not like the biology has changed in 2 generations, but there's way more injuries and especially way more like kind of tissue injuries, way more, ACL tears and that kind of stuff. And there are two thoughts. Thought one, athletes are bigger, stronger, faster, so they're just doing more with their bodies, which is causing more injuries. And thought number two is, back in the 80s, you have a basketball player, and in high school, well, they were on the football team and they were the star pitcher on the baseball team and they ran, track in the fall and then they played basketball. Like, and they were great at any sport they did. They had a summer job out on the farm where they're lifting heavy things. And so they had, from a kinesiology standpoint, they had all this other movement and training where they were they were becoming resilient in all their parts of their body, where they were strengthening all these different parts. Versus today's NBA star, from the age of 6, they're playing basketball like 10 games a week for 10 years. And it's the same repetitive motion. And they get really good. But then when they, turn 26, all the stress on the knees and the joints that they've been stressing for years, they never develop other strengths in the chain. And this is why modern athletes are getting more injured, is because they're not well rounded. So do you think I've sort of explained this? I mean, that was a kinesiology standpoint. Maybe I shouldn't have done that one, but it's sort of the same thing of ease and specialization versus diversity and resiliency. And the last thing I'll do is, I was in the library recently. Okay. Are you following at all? You're very quiet.
I'm riveted.
Thank you. I was in the library recently. And we have a very good library here. And I there are two types of library goers. There's the people who know what they want and they go to the little computer and they type it in and they get the number and they walk around until they find it and then they get the book and they leave. And then there's the wanderers who just sort of wander the aisles,
Which are you?
look at books. I'm a wanderer. Okay, maybe there's a book I want, I'll get that, and then I'll be like, oh, what? Oh, look at that. And it's just a peek behind the curtain. Last time I was in the library, I took home a short history of Afghanistan, a long book about letters and memoirs regarding famous events in the state of Ohio. I don't think that one had been checked out very recently. It's like 600 pages of like letters from like 1843 and stuff. and also a very long and so far riveting book on the Crimean War. That was a war between like England and France and the Ottoman Empire and Russia, and the what was remaining of Genghis Khan's golden horde in Crimea. So yeah, I'm a wanderer. I kind of wander around and pick stuff. And I saw this book. It was a big book. It was like 300 pages. And it was a book of knots. Just like, here's not a book of knots with pictures, and you can learn how to tie knots. Now, for those of you who may not know, there are a lot of kind of knots. It is one of those ancient human traditions of having a string or a yarn or a fiber of some sort, and figuring out all the 700 different ways that you can tie it together, because people had a lot of free time back before they invented Netflix. And of course, nautical stuff, and there are lots of.
Well, there's practical reasons for
It's a
tying
little bit like
some
dogs, right?
knots.
Like there are all these types of dogs, but most of the breeds of dogs that we have actually were bred for a purpose, right? They were bred to be a working dog of some sort. They were bred to, retrieve or kill or hunt
You're not
or.
going to get upset if I tell you that I think we're wandering off topic, are you?
All right, I'll pull the knots back.
You went to
So
the library. There's two kinds of ways or
yeah, I'm a
people that
wanderer. It's
wander.
fine. Okay. So
Okay.
I wandered and I saw this book. It's a book of knots. And on one hand, there is no reason that anyone, unless you're like a fisherman or a ship captain or something, or you really like survivalist camping, should just check out, and I didn't do it, but should check out this book of knots and just spend their free time sort of learning all the different knots that
I would like that.
one could do. Now you are a knitter,
And a
crocheter.
textile
Yeah,
fabric
yeah. So
person.
that
Yeah.
is down your
Yeah,
alley a
yeah,
little
yeah.
bit. So like, there's no reason to do that.
Mhm.
I guess if you found it enjoyable, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's fine. But we're not. I'm not necessarily. Well, enjoyment's part of it, but I'm more talking about learning, overcoming challenges than
Mhm.
doing things for fun.
Mhm.
In this kind of thing, in this question. And so, on one hand, there's no reason that you should learn this book of knots. It's not relevant to the daily life of whatever, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, if everyone learned a bunch of knots, they would be more resilient people. They would have to struggle doing something not in their comfort zone, learning this thing that is seemingly irrelevant. But then from time to time, they may come across physical challenges, and they would be more resilient in knowing how to manipulate in 3D objects in space and how they kind of tie together. And if they were, ever in a situation where there's a piece of rope, they could whip together a knot for the situation. So this is the intersection. And I don't know if you want to start with kids or start with adults, but what are your thoughts on pushing humans in ways that are not necessarily fun, that can be uncomfortable? And maybe they're not like, surviving in the wilderness uncomfortable, but even just reading a long book that maybe you don't want to read, or working on a craft that whatever, or having to do a lot of tasks that you don't consider fun, not taking shortcuts, not hiring out to do things, having to do all this stuff, especially as a kid, and it's it's not good for the person in the short term. Baby sleep is the better example, right? It's not good for the baby to be getting less sleep in the short term, but in the long term, maybe creating more resiliency when exposed to different stimuli. So that was the very long. I don't want to call it a preamble, but you said you were riveted, so I'll I'll hopefully that's the case. So what are your thoughts about this intersection? And is there, in your opinion, sort of a right answer
Well,
generally?
you know, I can answer it from a psychology point of view. I can answer it from a design point of view. But basically, it comes down to what is the goal, right? So if the goal is to get something done quickly and easily, then, don't go for the resiliency route. I mean, I think what you're describing is true. All of it is true, when you're talking about the advantages, for instance, of building in resiliency into whatever it is, right? Um, and there's so many examples in the world of this, right? In our daily lives. I mean, cooking came to mind as you were talking, right? I can I can just, I can buy the stuff from the company that just sends it to me and with the recipe that's minimalized, and I just cook it up and then there it is and I have great food. And maybe I tried something new, but did I really, learn deeply a certain cooking technique that I can now on my own, go and do? Maybe not, right? But so I think it depends on what your goal is. So if we go back to the baby example, uh, or the child example, and I think this is a huge, this is a big philosophical question in some ways. But what's your goal? Is your goal that I've read the research, and making sure the baby is sleeping really well and really deeply is critical at this stage, and therefore I'm going to do everything I can. Booty baby monitors. I'm like, as you were describing that, I'm thinking some startup guy has got to stop. Just stop. He needs to go do something else. It was like, oh my god. Anyway,
For those of you who are curious, for example, there's owlet. I don't know if it's the French et,
oh my god.
AWLET, and you get a security camera with an
Okay,
app on your
no,
phone,
I'm done.
and then you have
Okay,
the FDA cleared baby stat
well,
monitoring
there
system,
you go. Um, so
and it wraps around their little foot.
right, I'm sure. So if the goal is, like I said, that we really want the baby to get the deepest sleep possible, or maybe the goal is we want the baby to go to sleep and be quiet and stay asleep so that we can get some sleep, whatever your goal is, then that will make you want to, you know, have the baby, do the white noise machine and do the booty and do the this and do the that. But if the goal is, I want in the long term, I want the baby to be resilient about sleep and and learn to self-soothe and learn to go to sleep anywhere at any time when it's tired, then you're not going to want to do that. So I think resiliency is a real thing. Um, in all of these examples, well, no, in many of these examples, especially to do with babies and learning and children and even adults and learning, the whole idea of habits and conditioned responses is critical. So yes, if you have a white noise machine as a baby or as an adult, right, and you use that to go to sleep, you are conditioning yourself to fall asleep in certain situations. And it does mean that, if you find yourself somewhere where you don't have your white noise machine, now you might have a hard time going to sleep because you've taught your body and your mind to go to sleep with certain stimuli. And so I think you got to weigh, those different ideas against the goal. And that's how you're going to have to decide. If you're asking me, my personal opinion is for a lot of these things is probably to go for resiliency. Um, but that's kind of like, again, that comes back, I think, to philosophy, right? Maybe more than science. Um, But I think it's a good question, and I think it's one that I think it's easy to forget about that and just go, you get this, here's a new product, here's a new theory, here's what the other uh, coaches are doing, and then you just kind of follow along and use the latest idea and use the new technology, and then you do condition the human to do certain things in certain ways, and uh, you don't maybe you don't realize you're doing it. And in the short term or in a very specific arena, it might be good, but then you lose the generalized and the resiliency.
Hmm.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good answer. Uh, when we're talking about, um, for example, basketball, the odds that you get drafted in the NBA are higher if from the age of 3 all your parents did was have you train for basketball.
Yeah, but then you have to really ask, how important is that? And is that really your goal? To raise a child in order to be drafted into the NBA and make all your decisions based on that is like, okay, is that really what everybody, including the child, will want? And I think in terms of parenting, this happens all the time, with parents deciding what's really important is, and then, you know, gearing all the education and the experience and the habits, to this really, really narrow thing. And,
It's
the
very
thing,
very common. I mean, in today's, I don't know, millennial parent world, and whether that's basketball or taekwondo or debate or rock climbing or
well, okay, but there's a difference between picking a thing and saying, "Oh, we're gonna all work on this thing just because 'cause it'll teach us, to work on a thing," right? It'll teach us to concentrate. There's nothing wrong with that. But if really the goal is, this child is going to be a professional, violin player and, at an expert level and travel around the world playing violin, and we're gonna decide that when they're, 5 years old, I have to question that because that may or may not work, and the child may or may not really wanna do that, and, it's like, why are you being that narrow, I guess, is the question. Like, is that I guess from a philosophy standpoint, I don't get it. Like, why would you wanna and especially with something like the NBA, I mean, like you said, how likely is it? I mean, how many spots are there every year? And so you're gonna
oh yeah, no, it's
spend your whole life trying to raise a child who can make it
yeah, but
into
if
the
you go if you
NBA
go
when
to
it
like if you interview most good basketball players and you ask them, they're 16 and you ask them, "Hey, what's your plan?" He's like, "I'm gonna go play in the NBA."
well,
That's
yeah,
just
I know. That's what they all wanna do.
or half of all the musical theater, the real if
They're
you ask
gonna
the
be on
really
Broadway.
talented ones, they're like, I'm gonna make it on Broadway."
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, unless I mean, and again, this is I'm not gonna judge families or people for doing that, but I will point out that if you do that in a way that cuts off everything else, okay? It's okay to concentrate. There's no problem with, you know, concentrating on a few things in your life rather than, oh, hey, I'm going to go, even as an adult, I'm going to be in musical theater and I'm going to, you know, learn to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Then you end up not getting really good at any one thing and you are too busy and you don't enjoy it. So there's nothing wrong with concentrating, but concentrating on something to the exclusion of everything, any other
Yeah.
pathways or anything else in your life, I think is probably not healthy. Um, but there's another underlying thing you were getting at, which is the whole question of ease versus difficulty.
Yes, and that's this is yeah, that's sort of part 2. So this is the making life easy versus making life harder.
Y-
There is a it goes both ways. I think there's stereotypes on both sides. So the one stereotype is like the, you know, overbearing like military dad who, you know, there are like strict rules in the house and you have to do all these things and everything has to be clean and it's got to be this and it's got to be that, and like we don't have anyone who mows the lawn, like, you know, kids do all these chores.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of other kind of uh, examples, because there are things that you can do in life that make life easier
Right.
for you or for people.
Right.
And
Right.
then
Right.
there's, you know, purposely not doing those things that make things easy so that the kid, the
Build
person
character or
builds
strength or
character. Yeah,
something.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
through
Yeah.
hardship, right?
Right.
Um uh, Another example maybe would be taking the kid and just chucking him in the deep end of the pool. Right, you're gonna learn how to swim through terror, and you know, having to fight for life or death or whatever, and then you'll figure out how to swim.
I mean, okay. So in all of these things, there is a continuum from,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know,
And I was leaning, but like, so there's a stereotype, and that some of that is bad. On the flip side, there's a stereotype with like the really spoiled kid whose family has like the nanny that picks up everything, and they got, you know, takeout food every night for dinner, and they have, you know, the lawn care service that comes out and, you know, makes the, you know, there's no chores for the kid, and like they get like a new car when they're 16, and there's like a very like sort of stereotype of a very soft spoiled child, which is
yeah,
also bad. So you can sort of go both ways, and, you know, society will sort of look down on people who are spent a lot of money to not have to do a
to
lot,
circumvent a lot of the
and then
work.
they're seen as soft and fragile, stereotypically. And then there's like the people who um, could have done that, but like on sort of on purpose went through all these trials and have become hard. There's a glorification of the I didn't have the option to be soft. You
Yeah.
know, like I you know, was a El Salvadorian immigrant, and I swam across the river, and we
Yeah.
lived in poverty, and I pulled myself out of my bootstraps. And so like, in at least in the United States, there is a glorification of the strength through hardship because of no other option. So if you have the option to make life easy and you don't, you're a tyrant. If you have the option to make life easy and you do, you're soft and spoiled. If you don't have the option to make life easy and life was hard, then you're like, that's the American dream. So it's this very kind of delicate balance depending on your circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to bring up two other psychology concepts that I think
Sure.
are at play here. Um, so one is just, I talk a lot about self stories, right? And self stories drive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a part, some of this is self story, Guthrie.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and some of it is rationalization, right? So, you know, you can have someone who didn't have a lot of advantages and had a difficult life and had to work really hard and had to do it all themselves. And, you know, uh, you can come out of that with the self story about how unfair it is, and I'm a victim, and it's just not fair. And if I had had a chance, I could have done great things, but I'm not one of those people. People have been beating up on me, and I mean, I've been downtrodden and beaten down, and that's why I am the way I am. Right? That's one
Mm-hmm.
self story. You
Mm-hmm.
know, On the other hand, you can have this person who had the same circumstances, but their self story is, this makes me strong. This makes me resilient. This makes, I'm going to rise above it, and become a hero and all of that. Right. And so I think part of it is just, the version of the story that you decide to tell yourself and others, and the version you decide to live. And I really, you know, that isn't always true. I mean, if it gets bad enough, yeah, you can't overcome that. You never overcome that, and you were a victim. I mean, that's the reality too. But some of it, if it's borderline, some of it is self story. But the other thing I want to talk about is something to do about. I want to talk about the psychology, because some of this, because some of it has a behavioral economics root background, which is when we work hard for something, we value it more. If we had to put a lot of time and energy and blood and sweat and tears and work hard at it, sometimes it means that that thing, that skill, that material thing we earned, or what that lesson or whatever it is, um, we value it more. So there
Yeah.
is a whole thing of and this is part of the whole problem or issue with uh, um, hazing, and it's like this organization, that whether it's a fraternity, whether it's the military, whatever it is, you know, I mean, I went through the Marine Corps training. I didn't, but if I did, right, if I could say that, is like, and it was really, really hard, and it's an exclusive group. Not everybody can make it, and I did all these really, really tough things, and then maybe I value it a whole lot because it was so hard. I mean, we know people value something when it was difficult to get or attain.
Right.
And if someone just hands it to you, then maybe you don't value it as much. So that's a human thing, we know, that people, and is it rationalization? I don't know. But we do know if people work hard at something, they value it more. And the other thing that I think comes in here, if you recall, we've talked, I think we maybe even talked on one of our podcast episodes about fluency versus disfluency, which comes from
Connor.
Connor. What's
Connor.
it? Connor something demon. What's the
No,
middle?
no, it's
Con
Demon Yeoman.
Connor Connor Demon
Yeoman,
Yeoman? Yeah.
if I'm
Who
pronouncing
did
it
the
correctly.
research and talks about fluency and disfluency. And the idea being that if you think something is easy, which is fluency means ease,
Yeah.
uh, then you don't work as hard. If you think something is going to be difficult, disfluency, then you kind of go on alert and you go, oh, wait a minute, this might be tough. I might have to work more to learn this or do this. And so what happens is you do work harder and you do pay attention, and and so on. And so actually you end up being better at it, or learning it better, or remembering it longer, because your whole system to thinking
Yeah.
got kicked in, and you paid more attention and you worked harder. So that goes along with it too. So there is therefore something to be said for things to not always be easy, and to have to put in effort. And if you do, chances are two things are going to happen. Three things. You're going to learn it better. Well, two. You're going to learn it better or become better at it. That's number one. And the other thing is you're probably going to value it more. Now, up to a limit, right? I mean, if it
Right.
becomes too hard, then it just goes into, punishment or whatever, and resentment, and then I don't appreciate it. It was too much. So there, it is a continuum. Um, there's a whole. I don't know if in some cultures, uh, and I think, oh, I'm going to get this wrong. It might be in Japan. but it might be in China. So I don't know. There are some cultures where part of the learning experience in school is what we in the US would consider humiliation, but they don't consider it that. So it's very common, for instance, uh, to call on a student to do like a mathematical problem on the board, knowing that it is likely beyond their capability, right? And so they go up to the front and they try to do it and they fail. And that's considered a really valuable educational tool. And then
Mhm.
they sit down, and the whole rest of the class kind of has to explain to them how bad that is and why they failed. And it's like in the US, it would be like if you did that like in a classroom of 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds, you know, it would be like, why are they doing that? That's such a terrible teaching method. How could they have humiliated my child and all of that? And in whatever culture this is that I can't remember, it's considered like a wonderful educational tool because I don't know why.
Well, if I'm gonna play the devil's advocate, you
Yeah.
will fail in your career. You will
Yes.
fail when you
There you
ask
go.
someone out on a date. You will
Thank you.
fail when you're on a project and it
Right.
doesn't go
It is
well.
not gonna go well, and so you have to learn how to take criticism and ideas from others, you have to learn how to deal with the failure, you have to learn how to come back from the failure, and so on and so
How to
on.
like shake it off.
Yeah, so that they think that's in that culture, they think that's really important, and that's what all students need to learn, and and, I think over in the here in the US, some people believe that, but I think there's a lot of people that think, "No, that's not that," the children especially must always be made to feel good, and, that's part of that whole, there's a lot of, um there's a fair number of people that are dismissive of, I guess it would be considered millennials. I don't know. They'll scoff at the idea of, well, you don't get a prize for showing up, right? 'Cause this idea that there's a whole generation of kids that grew up where, as long as they showed up and tried, that was wonderful, and they were told how
Yeah.
wonderful they were. And there
Yeah.
are older people who are like, "That's ridiculous, showing up and trying is nothing, if you didn't
Is it the
achieve it, you didn't achieve it."
participation trophies is
There
the
you go.
phrase
Yeah.
that you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, maybe that's maybe participation is fine, but, um, there's a divide, among generations. I don't even know that it's is it real that there really is a whole generation of people
So
who learned with participation
here's
trophies? I
my
don't know.
understanding. It's a very rough understanding, and
Yeah.
so call it sophomoric at my own peril.
Okay.
Is that there was a group of parents in the late Gen Xers, the young Gen Xers into
Okay.
the elder millennials
Okay.
who completed, I guess if you would want to say, the movement that began in the 40s of not like beating the crap out of your kids.
Yeah.
So there used to be a very much like kids need to learn structure and you should beat them. And then
Yeah,
it
I don't
was
I don't think it
they
goes
need
back
to
I don't think the switch goes back that far. I think it goes back to, like, the '60s and '70s when that switch occurred.
I disagree because you should
Really?
look at the publication of Dr. Spock's book, the first one. That was when it really took off. So let's make sure I'm right. Uh, let's fact check this. Um, the uh, Common Sense book of baby and child care became a bestseller, and it came out in 1946.
And you're saying Spock is of the "let's be nice and not beat the crap out of them"?
Yes, and that was, I would say, he was the beginning of sort of that movement, and there were many others that sort of towed a similar line. But it was, and you could, get into the weeds, and I don't want to get into the weeds because some people are like, well, he actually said like, don't it's like be firm but like not mean, and but it doesn't really matter. The
Yeah.
point is that since the 40s, um, parents became a lot nicer to their children
Mhm.
and let their children feel that they were supported
Mhm.
and comforted.
Mhm.
And I think what I think the peak of that happened with the elder Gen Xers and sorry,
Yeah.
the young Gen Xers and the later millennials.
Okay.
And that I think there was maybe a 10-year period where that was just um, I don't want to say taken to an extreme, but
No, I
each
think you could
each
say
10-year
take it
period
to state.
was the people were more nice and more supportive and
Less
uh,
strict.
less mean to their
Yeah,
kids. And
discipline.
mean, you
Yeah.
can be mean in a negative context, but you can also be mean in a firm context, right?
Yes.
Like you did something bad,
Right.
you're gonna get
And
punished. Not
there are consequences.
corporal
Yeah.
punishment, but like, right, like
Yeah.
grounded in timeouts
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
know this and a
Yeah.
more strict household. I have heard from talking to teachers, as you may have heard as well, that a lot of the kids, people who've been taught for 30 years, uh, really the idea that like the teachers feel that they can't say no to the kids
Yeah.
and the kids run everything.
Yeah.
They run the house, they run the show, they run this. I think that hit a nadir, and then there was the younger millennials who are, I don't know, I guess having kids now,
Yeah.
are starting to the pendulum is swinging back a
Swinging
little
the
bit
other way. Yeah.
where they're like, yeah, all these Gen X parents and elder millennials, they were super soft with their kids
Yeah.
and they bought them like 10 trillion toys and let them run the house and
Yeah.
let them think that everything they did was super important and special
Yeah.
constantly. And, what the kids need is they need caring parents, but with like structure.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that that's the majority. I don't know. This is beyond what I'm an expert in. But I do think that maybe the pendulum is swinging back a little, a little bit, or maybe a lot bit. I'm not sure. But just, kind of take that
Yeah.
as a grain of salt. Um, do you want to do our pivot?
Yeah.
So let's pivot now and talk about the second question here, which is so let's talk about users, because we've been talking about humans, and that's fine,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to go like have an ordeal that was really hard and challenging, but then on the other side you've learned a lot of skills and
Yep.
maybe, and if with enough time you'll look back in fondness on it if it wasn't too traumatic. I think a lot of people have had that experience of, yeah, that was really tough when I was working out on the football team,
Yeah.
and those 2-a-day practices, oh, in the sun, it was so brutal, but man, those were the like
Those were the days.
what
Yeah.
fun we had,
Yeah.
and so
Right.
you can, as long as it's not too traumatic, like a lot of
Right.
people can get to nostalgia
Right.
through of what was at the time
Difficult.
difficult,
Mhm.
maybe even misery in the
Mhm.
moment. If anyone's
Mhm.
been through like a really hard sports practice, like
Mhm.
it's not fun. um but let's talk about users.
Yeah.
There is um
Because we have analogies.
there's a value in taking unsophisticated users and giving them skills, training them in the ways of the software, and making them more sophisticated users that understand what they're actually doing, that understand how the software works, that are turning them from novices into at least moderates, maybe not professionals, but they're learning skills that are making them better, and it makes the software they're using more valuable to them because they understand the all the nuances that are going on behind the scenes. But that takes work. And then there's the idea that we should make life as simple for users as is possible, and that they shouldn't have to learn how the software works. It should be intuitive, and they should be able to just use it and get to where they want to go.
Oh man, this
Is this
this is
part
a
two?
loaded
Okay, all
topic,
right.
and I have
Okay, well then,
strong opinions on this,
okay, so this
Guthrie.
is we're gonna have to part two it then.
No, 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 no. I can do it
You
really
can't.
quickly.
I don't know if you can
Oh
then.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Because I have real definite feelings about this.
okay.
Okay.
You go. You monologue.
First of all, we're going to go back to what we said before. It depends on what your goals are. First, so what's important? Are you trying to create something, a tool, software, technology? Is the goal that people be able to do this thing as easily and quickly as possible? Then you've got to design it to be, as you said, intuitive and easy to learn and easy to use. The problem I see with what you just said is, first of all, I think it is a super handy excuse. Super handy excuse. Uh, oh, we don't have to make this easy to use because it's good for the user to struggle through it and learn it. And it wasn't easy to create it. We worked really hard to create this complicated structure that really doesn't make sense to people who need to use it. But hey, if we share with people the complicated structure of the whole model and they finally master it, how wonderful will that be? And then they're going to be able to more easily use the next piece to this software, the companion. So they're not just going to use Premiere; they're also going to use, the media encoder and Photoshop, and those are equally hard and maybe work according to the same structure, although they don't really. But let's say they did. And so it'll be worth this investment of time because, they'll be smarter and they'll be able to use all the other badly designed software that we have created. So I think I don't, I'm like, uh, uh-uh, uh-uh. It,
Let me give you a hypo though.
okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
So let's look at professional software. Let's stick with Adobe.
Okay.
I don't know if you are aware, but if you Adobe has a lot of stuff where you click a button and it applies some default settings. Okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Say you're smoothing a raster image and a curve. There's you can just click it and it'll do some preset settings. So
Yeah.
for the novice,
Yeah.
you click it and then you just kind of do it and
Yep.
it's kind of good, but
Yep.
maybe it's not exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Or for example, I ran into this recently. I had a rasterized image, and I had too many points.
Yep.
I had 15,000 points,
Yep.
and we needed to get down to 3,000 points.
Yeah.
And so there's a simplifier that you can use that these 2 points are
right.
basically the same.
Yeah.
We'll turn this into 1 point.
Yep.
But if you just click on it, we could not get the results that we needed.
Right.
And so
You had to go in and
but if you click on in the window,
right,
then
and
then
it
you
opens
the
it
thing
up, and
pops
then
up
you
that
have
has
all
the
the
7,
detail and right.
criteria, and you
That's
can
right.
fiddle with the sliders. So from a design perspective, right? On one hand, just clicking the button and doing it for the user is more seamless. They don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. However, they're going to be like, "Oh, this doesn't look good," and they may get frustrated with it. Whereas if they actually were forced every time before they did it to select the settings, and maybe they come with defaults, but in fact, many times most of the Adobe things come with like default 1, 2, 3, like small, medium, large, and then you can see how the sliders adjust. Once you can see the way the knobs work, then you have a better understanding of, okay, this is what I need to do to get this result I want.
Right. I understand that. And there's lots of examples like this. I mean, you and I have both used the Ableton music software, and there's similar analogies in there. There's things in Ableton where just apply the Just apply this, and it does. But if that's not what you want, if you want a deeper level of control, you can actually go in and change minute parts of the setting. So, but to say, I think the analogy or what you're saying here is, oh, let's strip out that automatic level for the people who don't, let's just strip it out. So if you want to make any changes whatsoever to this, then you must go into the detailed thing and you must learn it. So I mean, it depends again, what 80% of the people need to do 80% of the time. And
Mm.
if you're going to say that, hey, for a lot of people, maybe not 80, but 60, 70% of the people, most of the time, if they just do the quick thing, it's going to do what they want. And then there's the situations and or the people where it's not going to, and we want them to use the interaction that gives them more control. So, I think that's why I said you have to know the goal. You have to know what is it people are trying to do and what they're trying to do most of the time. And then you have to design for that. And I would not, if you say, no, we're not going to do the easy path for any of this for anybody because it's really much better for them to learn and to understand what they're doing. And, it's like, okay, but is that, maybe that's okay. But is that what, if most people most of the time need to go to the detail level, then don't give them the easy route. Give them the detail level because that's what most people are going to need to do. But to just say, oh no, we're going to make everybody go the more difficult and laborious route because it's good for them. And then they'll really understand what they're doing. I don't know. I don't know if that's and the what I was saying before, the objection I had before was I think it goes beyond that. If the only discussion was do we make doing this thing easy but they don't have all the controls, or do we make them learn how to really do it in detail? That's an interesting question you can talk about. But what I was saying before was I think this whole thing is an excuse for poor design. I think there are definitely, situations where people pretend they're doing it because they want to give the user a lot of control, but their design for giving the user a lot of control is pretty unusable. And instead of addressing the usability issues, they just, say, well, no, no, no. It's all, say, if you just understood why we designed it this way, then you'd be able to use it. It's like, I don't want to understand why you designed it this way. Like that's, I don't care, I don't want to learn programming, that's for sure. So I think you have to be careful or it just becomes a reason for having poor design. And, I think this is right now quite, what's the word? Is it endemic? What does endemic mean?
That's sure. That's
It means it's
that's the right
happening a
term.
lot, right?
Um,
Because,
however, I
yeah, because
will.
I think there's this whole thing about, oh, yeah, all right, wait a minute. And then the other thing you have to realize is there's this whole thing where if I have mastered the poor interface and all the difficulties with hard to use software, well, it was hard and I learned it, so I value it. So I'm better than you. You poor person that does, you don't know how to use technology. Oh my God. And it's only because some people just put up with poor design and somehow feel superior for putting up with poor design. Yeah, I don't buy it. I'm sorry, you were trying to say something.
I no, that was fine. I was just saying, like, on the flip side, um, it it does involve users' mental models about what software is supposed to be, and so there's a lot of people who walk into software expecting to click one button and it all just works, and they have high expectations. of software. And a lot of companies have tried to duplicate the Apple's magic, like, quote, it just works. And so it looks like it just works, and then it doesn't work. And I feel like a lot
Mhm.
of the software that we have today is people trying to be Apple and have very easy, intuitive, oh, it's magic, you just click it and then everything is simple. And the interface is that it's simple and you don't have to do anything and it just works. And then the experience is that no, it's actually complicated and it doesn't just work and there's
Right,
all these
right.
problems. Whereas if the interface was more complex to begin with, if the user had the mental model of this is sort of complex software, here are all the options, here are the parameters, here's where things go wrong, then actually it would be easier to troubleshoot because you would
Well, it's
you
just
wouldn't have the
also
expectation that it's,
this
oh
is
yeah, it
also
should just
right.
work.
This is also the disfluency and fluency. If I come up against a new piece of software and I look at it and it looks a little complicated, then I go, "Whoa, I better really pay attention here. This is not just going to be a one-click thing, right?" And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, Guthrie, for I do this for a living. Every day I'm looking at interfaces that people are creating. And I, you know, I can't, I just don't know how to express to you, except I do because I do it all the time. And you've heard this. Um, there is absolutely a tendency out there in the world, and the software is complicated. It is complicated, but there's this overcomplication. There's either an unwillingness or just a lack of knowledge that there's a way of designing this interface that that would make things easier for the humans to grasp the conceptual model. But the concept, and we did a whole series right on conceptual models.
Yeah.
But the conceptual model is poorly devised, and then the interaction design that's coming out of it, and the user interfaces coming out of it is also poorly designed. So now you have a confused conceptual model that isn't clearly conveyed, and the whole thing becomes a big mess. And then the excuse is, well, it's complicated software, and it's going to be complicated for them to learn. It's like, okay, I understand that, but you have just increased the complication by not paying attention to conceptual model design and not designing a good interface. So I don't want this to become an excuse. Now, the other place where this comes into play, by the way, is the design of games. Now, and that's an interesting place for this too, because the whole part of I I think, and I'm not a game designer, but I think part of what goes on in game design is that there is an enjoyment and a sense of accomplishment of improving your skills in some games, right?
Yeah.
And that should be built in. So, I always joke around by saying, "Oh, I've designed this wonderful game. You're going to love it. You don't have to think. You don't have to remember anything. You don't have to really find anything on the screen, and you don't have to do anything physically.
Yeah.
It's great." And it's like, what? It sounds incredibly boring because games are about games are about making things purposely tricky and difficult. I mean, that's
Right.
what makes a game interesting. So I think
Mhm.
that is a different realm. So if you're a game designer, you are building in difficulty on purpose and carefully, and hoping that people will stay engaged and want to keep getting better at it. But I do not think that my customer relationship management software should be based on progressively getting more difficult so that my skill level has to level up.
Um, Now, however, let me just give you one quick counter before we end.
Okay, what?
I grew up as a kid using poorly designed, difficult software
Mm-hmm.
that was not intuitive, that
Mm-hmm.
was had too many features. Playing video games like from the 90s that just were like, here's like a menu of 17
Yeah, right.
options or whatever. Like
Right.
it just made no sense at all. The whole thing was a giant mess, right? And I figured it out, and I spent years kind of getting a sense of how to operate this stuff. And now I'm tech support for everyone because of my years in the trenches with terrible interfaces and terrible software that
Yes,
were hard to
that's
navigate.
right.
And so
That's
when I
right.
come across anything, I can figure it out
Right.
because of
Right.
I'm very adaptable because I wasn't just given
I know.
Apple Magic my entire life and here, click the button and it just works.
I know.
So I am better at troubleshooting and better at
Yep.
learning software and better at being a
Yep.
user in a lot of ways. And I help everyone in my life to navigate through everything. And a
Right.
lot of that's because of the garbage that I
That you
slogged
had
through for
I know.
years.
I know. All right. Well, so we should just design it so it's all garbage and everybody has to do that. It's possible.
I don't, you know,
That's
I don't
one way
know.
to think about it.
I don't know, right? You trying to short term or long term?
I don't
I'm
know.
not
I
sure.
think it's a good question, and everyone in your life, including me, really appreciates that. That's the role you play. I know you sometimes get very frustrated with that role because there's too many people that need too much
Uh,
Guthrie personal tech support.
Shout out to Sim Island, which is just one of the no Sim Isle, one
One of
of
the
the
many places where you learned.
really a really kind of not very good interface that didn't make a whole lot of sense. But you know
But
what?
taught you those skills you
Taught
now
me those
employ every day.
skills that we had to figure
So
out.
it
Yeah.
gave you resiliency. So let's hear it for. So our new thing should be, Guthrie. In fact, we should have a workshop. How to do poor interface design in order to build resiliency in your user
So
population.
one of the things I do regret with like now that like back in the day, there were a lot less rules, right?
Yeah,
And with fewer rules, there are interfaces back, I'm looking at the interface for SimIsle. No one would ever do this today.
I know.
Like it is a totally unique way of
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah,
things and
yeah.
showing information. And I do think that we have a lack of diversity that is
In ideas, in
that is
design.
causing
Yeah,
sort of a UX monoculture, and it's I don't know. Back in the day, it was way more
anything goes.
anything goes,
Yeah,
and you got kind of more diverse
yeah,
things that you had to respond to. So
yeah.
I'm gonna have to maybe I have to get back and find some emulated Sim Isle. I'll maybe have to pull this back up.
Guthrie, if do we have any announcements we want to make? And
Um,
we always forget we should make these announcements at the beginning. But go ahead. We'd say that every
yeah.
time, and then we never do.
All
What do
right.
you want to announce?
So we've done a second edition of the 100 More Things book, not the 100 Things, but the 100 More Things
There's
book, which was your
so much confusion
well.
about this.
It's also double confusing. Well, oh look, okay. I'm gonna spell it out for everyone. You wrote a book called 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People.
Yes, I did.
Then you wrote a book called 100 More Things Every
Which
Designer Needs to Know About
nobody's
People,
ever heard
which
of that
no
second
one
one.
read
No
because
one read
you
because
only
they
get one
didn't
famous book.
understand how is that 100 more. Yes.
Then it's been a decade and they are popular books. So you went back and you made a second edition of
Of the
100
original
Things
100 Things book.
book. So there's a second edition through the
Yes.
publisher of the 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People.
Yes.
We have just finished the second
Second
edition of the
edition,
100
more
More
things.
Things
So, and
so
I'm
that's the
telling you,
100 to 200.
the mental model, conceptual model for this is a disaster. I just put an announcement out on LinkedIn about the second edition of the 100 More Things. And I tried to explain, and no one can get this. They think the 100 More Things is the
Is the
second
second
edition
edition of
of
100
100 Things.
things.
And
Yeah,
they
no,
asked
yeah.
me, how is 100 More Things different from the 100 Things? And it's
And you
like,
should say it's
it's
100 different
100
things
more things. It's
'cause it's
100
a
different things. It
different
goes
it's a
from
different book.
101 to 200. It's different things. And nobody gets it.
Yeah. So that is for sale on Amazon and
Yes.
Kindle. There's a Kindle version of
And it
that
100 More
around.
Things, second edition. It's different from
Yeah.
100
So
things, second edition.
that is out.
Yes.
Anyways, man, people can get in touch for other stuff. We're trying
Yeah.
to reboot the newsletter as well. So if
Yeah.
you're a
Look,
fan,
yeah.
you may
So,
start getting
Guthrie,
some
how do
emails.
they reach us?
Email info@theteamw.com.
Thank you, Guthrie.
All right. Bye.
Bye.